So here's a scenario. You just oversaw an incredible nationwide project that was achieved in a record 52 days. It came with all manners of problems and adversaries, but through your faith in God, you pushed through to the end of the project. When the project is finished, you return to your previous position and expected that the people you oversaw to maintain a certain way of living. But they didn't even wait a full month to revert back to their old ways and started breaking all the laws. And to add to all the things that they were doing, they added a whole new level of corruption to the mix, to the point they were putting some of the same people who oppose you to live in some of the most important buildings in the land, which according to the law was a big no-no. So what do you do to the person who moved into the said building when you return to set things straight? Nehemiah chapter 13 tells us the event of Nehemiah having to go back to Jerusalem not too long after returning to his role as cupbearer to the king in Babylon. After Nehemiah oversaw the building of the wall in Jerusalem, he urged the people to keep the law of the book of Moses in its entire form, even having the people make a covenant that they would. But there were a lot of bad actors in major positions. One of these bad actors was Eliashib, the priest who had authority over the storerooms of the house of God, which was a big position and responsibility. But Eliashib was good friends with a man named Tobiah, who gave Nehemiah a lot of headaches during his time as governor over Jerusalem while building the wall. Eliashib decided to give Tobiah one of the storerooms of the house of God to move into, which according to the law of Moses was against the law. So Nehemiah had to serve Tobiah the funniest eviction notice I have come across in the Bible. And we will get into why I say that right after a quick sellout where I ask you to leave a like on the video if you are enjoying it and subscribe for more unsung Bible characters and filler stories you probably haven't heard about in a church sermon brought to you by the Xplanations. Yes, working title TM. Where in this installment we will be taking a look at Nehemiah chapter 13, reading from the ESV. Now before this, Eliashib the priest, having authority over the storerooms of the house of our God, was allied with Tobiah, and he prepared for him a large room where previously they had stored the grain offerings, the frankincense, the articles, the tithes of grain, the new wine and oil, which were commanded to be given to the Levites and singers and gatekeepers, and the offerings for the priests. But during all this I was not in Jerusalem, for in the 32nd year of Artaxerxes, king of Babylon, I had returned to the king. Then after certain days I obtained leave from the king, and I came to Jerusalem and discovered the evil that Eliashib had done for Tobiah, in preparing a room for him in the courts of the house of God, and it grieved me bitterly. Therefore I threw all the household goods of Tobiah out of the room. Then I commanded them to cleanse the room, and I brought back into them the articles of the house of God, with the grain offering and the frankincense. The storerooms were to simply be used for the purpose of storing the various offerings and tithes that the people brought. It was prohibited for being used as anyone's living quarters, even among the Levites, who were the only ones that were allowed to hold a position of authority over these rooms. So, in knowing this, it should be clear to understand why Tobiah being there was frustrating to hear from Nehemiah's perspective, and considered it to be evil. But to add salt to the wound, Tobiah, according to the Bible footnotes and commentaries, was one of the men who opposed and conspired against Nehemiah countless times while he was in the process of building the wall, as referenced throughout the book, and in the previous installment of this video series where we covered how Nehemiah dealt with his haters and adversaries. But throwing out his rightful residence there was not the only thing Nehemiah had to deal with regarding the nonsense happening in Jerusalem since he left. It actually was only the beginning. I also realized that the portions for the Levites had not been given them, for each of the Levites and the singers who did the work had not gone back to his field. So I contended with the rulers and said, "Why is the house of God forsaken?" And I gathered them together and set them in their place. Then all Judah brought the tithe of the grain and the new wine and the oil to the storehouse, and I appointed as treasurers over the storehouse Shelemiah the priest and Zadok the scribe, and of the Levites Pedaiah, and next to them was Hanan the son of Zachar and the son of Mattaniah, for they were considered faithful, and their task was to distribute to their brethren. So not only did the priest in charge of the storehouse had his body move into the storehouse, but the Levites were also not getting the portion they were supposed to from what came into the house of God, causing them to have to go back out into the fields to work, which is a direct violation of the covenant the people made in chapter 10 of vowing to uphold the law of Moses, which included providing for the Levites with the relevant offering to sustain themselves. And in context, it was not because they were the leeches of Israel, but it was because the Levites were the ones chosen to oversee the worship of the entire nation of Israel. The Levites were responsible for the tabernacle and its implements, as well as overseeing the sacrifices and offerings of the people, which was not an easy task at all. All the priests came from the tribe of Levi and were provided for through the services as summarized in Deuteronomy 18 from verses 3 to 4, which goes over the laws of provision, along with Numbers 18 detailing the story of how this came to be as well. But the Levites not getting the provisions was not the end of the problems Nehemiah had to fix. Verse 14 fittingly says, "Remember me, O my God, concerning this, and do not wipe out my good deeds that I have done for the house of God and for its services. In those days I saw people in Judah trading wine presses on the Sabbath, and bringing in sheaves and loading donkeys with wine, grapes, figs, and all kinds of burdens, which they brought into Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. And I warned them about the day on which they were selling provisions. Men of Tyre dwelt there also, who brought in fish and all kinds of goods and sold them on the Sabbath to the children of Judah in Jerusalem. Then I contended with the nobles of Judah and said to them, What evil thing is this that you do, by which you profane the Sabbath day? Did not your fathers do thus, and did not God bring all this disaster on us and on the city? Yet you bring added wrath on Israel by profaning the Sabbath? So it was at the gates of Jerusalem, as it began to dark before the Sabbath, that I commanded the gates to be shut, and charged that they must not open till after the Sabbath. Then I posted some of my servants at the gates, so that no burdens would be brought in on the Sabbath day. Now the merchants and sellers of all kinds of wares lodged outside Jerusalem once or twice. Then I warned them and said to them, Why do you spend the night around the wall? If you do so, I will lay hands on you. From that time on, they came no more on the Sabbath. And I commanded the Levites that they should cleanse themselves, and that they should go and guard the gates to sanctify the Sabbath day. I will lay hands on you is my personal favorite verse of Nehemiah, because it shows to me how Nehemiah had enough of the people constantly breaking the commandments and covenants when they should know better, and was done talking and was ready to lay hands on folks. But that was not it for the trouble he had to fix. Continuing to verse 23, it says, In those days I also saw Jews had married women of Ashdod, Ammon, and Moab, and half their children spoke the language of Ashdod, and could not speak the language of Judah, but spoke according to the language of one or the other people. So I contended with them and cursed them, struck some of them and pulled out their hair, and made them swear by God, saying, You shall not give your daughters as wives to their sons, nor take their daughters for your sons or yourselves. Did not Solomon king of Israel sin by these things? Yet among many nations there was no king like him, who was beloved of his God, and God made him king over all Israel. Nevertheless, pagan women caused even him to sin. Should we then hear of your doing all this great evil, transgressing against our God by marrying pagan women? And one of the sons of Joiada, the son of Elishib the high priest, was a son-in-law of Sanballat the Horite. Therefore I drove him out. The people here again went directly against the covenant they signed and agreed to in chapter 10, which Nehemiah is referring to when he said, Curse them in verse 5. I also want to note that the point of separating from surrounding cultures was not racial. It was to prevent God's people from falling into idolatry. We see that he referenced Solomon directly in verse 26, to which if we know the story of Solomon, then we would know what caused his fall. We even see that the same priest who allowed Tobiah to move into the storehouse had mixed up his family tree with that of Sanballat the Horite, who was one of the main detractors and adversaries of Nehemiah when he was building the wall. The high priest was not allowed to marry a foreigner for the same reason stated earlier, so he had to drive him out from the position. So with all that headache of correction Nehemiah had to do, the book ends quite fittingly as Nehemiah pleaded, "Remember me, O my God, because they had defiled the priesthood and the covenant of the priesthood and the Levites. Thus I cleansed them of everything pagan. I also assigned duties to the priests and the Levites, each to his service, and to bring the wood offering and the first fruits at appointed times. Remember me, O my God, for good." And with that, we'll end off this installment of the unsung Bible characters and filler stories you probably haven't heard about in a church sermon, brought to you by the Xplanations. Yes, working title TM. If you watched to this point in the video, then why not consider leaving a like on the video and subscribing with post notifications, and even sharing the channel with others. On this channel, we primarily break down fictional media from a Christian perspective with emphasis on stories that twist the Bible, but we also make generalized Christian content covering unsung Bible stories you probably haven't heard about, and an initiative to do Christian creative projects ranging from making replicas of different places in the Bible to recreating scenes from Christian fictional films into a small-scale video game. We also started covering various Christian comic books on this channel as well. If you are looking for something else to watch on the channel, then I highly recommend you check out our other Nehemiah video where we looked at how to deal with your haters the biblical way, which is available to click on right now.